Hey there everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you again. So this is going to be super high production values, and you're going to be super entertained by all the action and the exploding cars and things, but the information is solid and that's what it's all about. So I'm going to try to tell you everything that I know about flash. What we have before us here is a Sunpack 544, and this is a great flash unit. It's got manual and it's got an auto mode, and the sensor for the auto mode is right there. It does not have TTL flash, through the lens metering flash, and flash isn't that hard. If you learn how it works, you're going to find out you don't really like TTL flash metering because you have no control over it. You're letting the engineers in the computer decide how your flash is going to go off and what it's going to light and how it's going to light. And you know, for the most part, you know, 80% of the time, 90% of the time, it's kind of right on, but it's that 10% there where if you know what you're doing, you can really make your photographs beautiful. All right, so what do we need to know about flash? Well, and here's where the artistic things come in. There's a few parameters. The first one would be shutter speed. And aperture. Also known as your f-stop. F-stop being a clue. I think I need to write bigger. Well, anyway, this is just getting it down on the board. And then with a digital camera, ISO. Okay, with film, you pick your ISO and you're good for the whole roll. But with a digital camera, the ISO can be a movable parameter as well. Now, all three of these things, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, remember, aperture and f-stop are the same thing. Shutter, aperture, and ISO are all movable, but they're all part of your exposure for your flash. All right, so let's remove some of the variables. These are all variables. Let's remove some of the variables. So for this discussion, what the most important thing and where we're going to start is with aperture. Okay, that one there. And in order to understand how the aperture works, we're going to make the shutter speed and the ISO a fixed value, okay, just for the sake of this discussion. So we're going to make our shutter speed, let's just say our flash sync speed in our camera, and we'll talk about that later, is 1/60th of a second. So for all of this discussion, our shutter speed is going to be 1/60th of a second, and our ISO is going to be 100. Okay? And that eliminates two of the three variables. Now we can discuss aperture, f-stops, and understand how they work and what they do. So over here is Mr. Photographer, and he's got a camera with a flash, and he's on a tripod, and the tripod's taller than he is. And here's the ground, and over here is his lovely subject, and there we go, and waving, okay. Here's some hair. Well, that's a scary subject. Anyway, so flash is all about distance, okay, because it uses the inverse square law. Inverse, look at this, is this top quality? Square law of physics, okay, there you go. And so it's all about distance. Now we're going to say that this subject is 10 feet. And I'm sorry, this discussion is all going to be in feet, because if I have to do it in meters, that's just going to melt my brain. From here to here is 10 feet. Now, let's say we have a manual flash unit. In other words, you get 100% power, half power, quarter power, eighth power. Okay? And we need to, in order to make a proper exposure at 10 feet, we have to know the guide number. of our flash. Okay? So, for the sake of this discussion, let's say our guide number is 110. What does that mean? What that means, believe it or not, is at 10 feet, okay, your aperture or f-stop is going to be f11 at 100% power. All right? If the guide number was 80, then at 10 feet, your aperture would be f8 at 100% power. Okay? All right. So, let me do this, okay? 2 feet, 2.8 feet, 4 feet, 5.6 feet, 8 feet, and I did that, well, you get the idea, and 11 feet, right? Okay, so 8 feet would be more like here. Look at the dry erase board, you just do this. So 5.6, 8, 11, yeah, that's kind of how it works, okay? So, see what I did there? Now, the smart people amongst you all will notice that 2 feet, 2.8 feet, 4 feet, 5.6 feet, 8 feet, 11 feet, 16 feet, 22 feet, 32 feet. Okay, you see where I'm going with that? Believe it or not, it's the reason why they're called f-stops. Because they're the inverse square law distance measurements that, you know, back in the 1950s, everybody knew this because there was no such thing as an automatic flash. And what is an automatic flash doing? What an automatic flash is doing is you take the exposure, the sensor on the flash, and TTL works the same way except it's using the camera as a sensor. You take the exposure, the flash fires, it illuminates the subject. When the sensor senses that the subject has had enough light, it cuts off the flash. That's how, and that would be called an auto thyristor if it's in the flash unit, or TTL flash metering if it's in the camera. The problem with TTL flash metering is the computer's involved and God knows what it's doing, okay? They're going to make it, the TTL flash is going to be much more complicated. So with the auto thyristor, you know what it's doing. Now for manual flash, you have to figure it out. So if you know that your guide number is 110 on your flash unit, you know that your exposure at 10 feet is always going to be f11. Okay? Now, as you get to where this gets wonky, okay, and I told you these feet distances, all right, where this gets wonky is going this way, these numbers come into play, and going this way, these numbers come into play. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a fourth variable, and the fourth variable is power of the flash, okay? So let's say you have a flash unit where you can dial in your power, all right? So one way to compensate, let's say your subject's at 5.6 feet, okay? And not 10 feet. At 5.6 feet, you have to close down 2 stops or reduce your power twice, okay? If you're at 100%, you need to be at 50%, and here you need to be at 25%, all right? You can't really go beyond 10 feet without lowering your aperture, right? So one way to do it closer is to reduce the power on your flash, a quarter. Okay, you see what I'm talking about? All right. You can't double your flash power. What you can do is lower your aperture. And so at 11 feet, okay, it's going to be f8. At 16 feet, it's going to be f5.6. At 22 feet, f4. And at 32 feet, 2.8. These are your f-stops. Now I know that got really confusing really fast, but if you go the other way and your subject gets closer to your flash unit at 100% power, let's say you can't change your power, At 8 feet, you need f16, and at 5.6 feet, you need f22. Okay, when you watch that a few times, if that doesn't make any sense to you, because it will, all right? Basically, it's the inverse square law. The closer your subject gets to your flash, you need to stop down your aperture to let less light in at 100% flash power, because the flash power is constant at 100% on manual. The farther you get away from your subject, the flash gets away from your subject, the light falls off faster, and that's the inverse square law. Okay, so you know, you have to either open up your aperture or get closer or get a more powerful flash. And watch that a few times. If that doesn't make sense, rewind the video, and when that makes sense, you understand how a flash works and how the inverse square law works, and how a flash why they call an aperture an f-stop. Okay, the only weird thing about it is when you're going this way, the numbers go up, but the scale is very useful for understanding your distances with your flash. And before flash, it was flash bulbs back in the 1950s. If you don't know what those are, look them up. And they didn't have variable power. They were one kind of power, and that was it. Let's go over the auto flash. Again, we'll go, let me get rid of some of this. So now auto flash. All right, so now auto flash, here's our subject. They're waving, give them some hair. Okay. The way, again, going over auto flash, if it's just the auto thyristor in the flash unit, the flash goes off. So you've got your camera set to, you know, let's say f11 at 10 feet, because that's our guide number. Okay. So the flash, you take the exposure, you take the picture, your camera set to f11, 1/60th of a second. The flash goes off. The light hits the subject. The light's reflected back to the sensor in the flash unit, and the flash unit shuts the flash off when the proper exposure is obtained. At this distance with 110 guide number at f11, the flash is going to blow full power, 100%. Okay? Now, let's say that your subject is at 5.6 feet away from you, okay, like at a reception, and they're all boogieing and dancing and whatever. I don't know what those things are there. This is an alien. We'll give him a nose. That's weird. Okay, so you're still set to f11, okay. The flash goes 1/60th of a second. The flash, you take the exposure, flash goes off, light goes out, hits the subject, comes back. The flash, the sensor in the flash is going to start the flash exposure, sense the exposure, and then it's going to shut it down at 25%. Okay? And you're going to get the proper exposure on the alien at the reception. And the flash did that by itself. TTL metering, what that's going to do is, the flash is connected to the camera's computer. The flash goes off. The light's reflected into the camera. The computer, I don't know, connects to the internet and goes back to Japan, and it talks to some people there, and they talk back to it. I'm just making crap up now. What happens is the computer thinks about it and runs its algorithms and goes through its whole thing, and it says, wow, okay, we need 25% power, and it tells the flash unit to do that. It's more complicated, and I don't know. You know, if you know how flash works, TTL, I don't like it personally, unless I've got the problem with TTL flash units for me is they tend to give you TTL, and maybe they give you manual. but I also like to have an auto mode built into the flash because that's how I like to shoot. I like the auto mode. I have more control over it that way. I have a little bit of automation, and I have a little bit of automation, but I also have full control over my flash unit. With TTL or manual, I don't find manual that useful, and I don't like second guessing the computer. I know what I want my flash to do, and in the auto modes I can do that. Nikon with their SB units used to be really good that way because they give you TTL, auto, and manual. Most of your TTL flash units only give you TTL and manual. These days I'm using the Godox flash units, and what is the 350 I think it is, and it's TTL and manual. And the problem with the and how do I use that because it doesn't have an auto mode? Well, I have to dial in plus or minus exposure, flash exposure compensation, which is not as easy as just using an auto mode and changing my aperture. But that's for another discussion. So there you have it. You can't ask for a better explanation than that. It's as clear as I can make it. If you have any questions, put them down below. I can make a whole nother video on fill flash and all the rest of it and how all that works, but I don't want to confuse everybody. If you watch this video a few times, it'll make some sense. All right? I hope that helps. Have a great one. Thanks for watching. And if you found this at all helpful, hit that old subscribe button and help the channel out. Costs you nothing and really makes my day when I see new subscribers there. So really appreciate it. Have a great one. We'll see you out there. Bye.